It doesn't begin with fire, nor with famine, nor with war. The fall of a great civilization often starts with a smile, a shrug, a lazy laugh at things that once demanded reverence. It begins not in chaos but in comfort, not with noise but silence. Picture a crowded amphitheater in ancient Rome. The seats are full, the crowd roars for blood, but not for justice, not for truth. The Senate still exists, but no one listens. Philosophers speak, but they are mocked. Bread is free, and circuses distract. The people are entertained, and that is enough. Now picture today. A screen glows inches from your face. Headlines flash in bold. Opinions are shared faster than thoughts can form. Expertise is labeled elitist. Doubt is mocked. Emotion triumphs over logic. And thinking, deep, honest thinking, feels almost archaic. But here's the truth no one wants to say aloud. We are not standing on the edge of decline. We are already walking through it, quietly, collectively, willingly, because decline doesn't shout, it whispers. In the way we dismiss wisdom as outdated, in how we choose entertainment over education, in how we stop asking difficult questions and start craving easy answers. Look around. We live in a time of technological brilliance, yet intellectual laziness. We know more than ever, yet understand less. And the reason is painfully simple. Critical thinking, the foundation of every flourishing society, is eroding. Not with violence, but with neglect. This isn't new. The Romans did it, the Maya did it, so did the scholars of the Islamic Golden Age. They reached unimaginable heights, then forgot how they got there. And now, so do we. But this script isn't about blaming the world. It's about looking inward, about recognizing the quiet choices in thought, in culture, and values that push civilizations not toward greatness, but toward stupidity. This is a story of how that collapse happens, silently, softly, smartly disguised as progress, and what you choose to do or not do when you finally notice. Walk into any room today and ask a hard question, not a controversial one, just a truly hard one. Something like, what does it mean to think clearly? Most people won't answer, not because they don't care, but because they've never been taught how to think, only what to think. The first quiet truth behind every great collapse is this: critical thinking dies long before a civilization does. Socrates called it the examined life. He warned that without it, life itself loses meaning. For this, he was sentenced to death, not for violence, not for betrayal, but for asking questions that made people uncomfortable. That same discomfort is alive today. Only now we don't need hemlock. We have distraction. We have speed. We have algorithms that serve us the answers we already believe. Consider this. False information spreads 6 times faster than truth on social media. Not because it's more accurate, but because it's more comfortable, more satisfying, more aligned with what we already want to hear. And this erosion of thought begins early, in schools that prioritize memorization over inquiry, in media that chases reaction over reflection, in a culture that rewards the loudest voice, not the wisest one. Once upon a time, children were taught logic, rhetoric, philosophy. Today, they scroll endlessly, learning to perform, not to ponder. Between 1970 and 2018, the percentage of college students majoring in the humanities dropped from 17% to 8%. Philosophy, the literal love of wisdom, is being stripped away, seen as impractical in a world obsessed with productivity. But a civilization that forgets how to think will soon forget how to survive. Because critical thinking isn't just for academics, it's for everyone. It's the immune system of a society. When it fails, we don't just make bad decisions. We lose the ability to recognize good ones. Without it, we become vulnerable to manipulation, to fear, to cheap promises. We trade wisdom for slogans, depth for dopamine, questions for quick fixes. And just like that, the dam begins to crack. Not with a flood, but with a trickle of forgotten questions, until the weight of our ignorance breaks everything open. There comes a point in every declining civilization where the future stops being a shared vision and becomes a personal afterthought. The collective we dissolves into a desperate me, not in rebellion, not in anger, but in apathy. This is the second quiet truth. Short-term narcissism replaces long-term wisdom. Alexis de Tocqueville saw it coming centuries ago. He called it soft despotism, a tyranny not of violence, but of comfort, a slow surrender to convenience, a culture so obsessed with individual ease that it forgets how to plan for tomorrow. Look at your own life. How many of your decisions are made for now, not later? How often do you choose what feels good today, knowing it will cost you tomorrow? Now multiply that by millions. That's how civilizations rot from within. Nietzsche warned of the last men, those who would trade greatness for safety, depth for security. People who no longer asked what stars were for, only what they themselves could consume before the light faded. He described them blinking, confused at ideas like longing, sacrifice, creation. It wasn't a prophecy, it was a diagnosis, and we're living it. We see it in political cycles that can't see beyond the next election, in corporations that chase quarterly profits over generational responsibility, in leaders who fear losing popularity more than losing their integrity. But the damage isn't just institutional, it's psychological. A 2011 study by Hal Hershfield found that when people imagine their future selves, their brains treat them almost like strangers. That's why saving money, delaying gratification, or taking hard steps now for distant rewards feels unnatural. We are hardwired for short-term thinking, yet great civilizations build systems that fight this instinct. They create rituals, values, laws, and education that honor what's to come, not just what is. The Maya failed this test. They had knowledge that could map the stars, predict eclipses, track the rhythm of the universe. But when faced with environmental collapse, deforestation, water shortages, soil degradation, they chose to expand palaces instead of protect forests. They knew what was happening. They just couldn't bear the discomfort of sacrifice. And now, it's our turn. We understand climate change better than any society has understood any existential threat. We can simulate the consequences decades ahead. But our decisions are shaped by election cycles, shareholder meetings, and short-term rewards. We ask ourselves if change is possible, but not if it's necessary. That is the trap, and if we don't climb out of it, we'll follow the same path, because a civilization that stops thinking beyond today has already given up on tomorrow. But perhaps the most dangerous turn comes not when wisdom is ignored, but when it is attacked. This is the third quiet truth. The rejection of expertise is the final stage before the fall. At first, it seems harmless, a joke about academics, a shrug at scientists, a casual dismissal of people who have spent lifetimes learning things we find inconvenient. But over time, this cynicism hardens into hostility, and suddenly, knowledge itself becomes the enemy. Carl Sagan warned us. He saw it coming long before the rise of social media. He wrote, "We have arranged a civilization based on science and technology, in which nobody understands science and technology. That's a prescription for disaster." And disaster is exactly what followed. Consider the COVID-19 pandemic. Never before had humanity possessed so much medical knowledge, so much data, so much global collaboration. And yet, millions chose YouTube videos over doctors, Facebook posts over epidemiologists, horse dewormers over vaccines developed by the world's leading experts. It wasn't a lack of information, it was a lack of trust. We've entered a phase where skepticism is no longer healthy inquiry, but automatic rejection, where being informed is seen as elitist, where asking for evidence makes you suspicious. And this decay isn't confined to medicine. Look at climate science. 97% of scientists agree on human-caused warming. But public trust remains fractured, not because of data, but because the truth feels threatening. We're witnessing what Hannah Arendt called the banality of evil, not monstrosity, but the quiet, thoughtless obedience to what's easy. A disengagement from difficult ideas, a surrender to simplicity. The Ming Dynasty knew this well. Once the most advanced maritime civilization on Earth, they had fleets that reached Africa decades before European explorers. But when a new emperor came to power, he viewed foreign knowledge with suspicion. Trade was curtailed, ships were burned, innovation halted, and in a few generations, they vanished from global leadership. Not because they were defeated, but because they turned inward and stopped learning. We are doing the same. Libraries close. humanities departments shrink, and in their place, influencers, algorithms, sound bites. Even now, we trust meteorologists with our weekend, but not climatologists with our century. We trust doctors with a broken arm, but not with our collective health. Why? Because real expertise often comes with hard truths. And in a world addicted to comfort, truth becomes intolerable. This is the final crack in the foundation. Not ignorance, but proud, aggressive ignorance. The kind that wears its refusal to learn like a badge of honor. The kind that says, I know enough, even when it knows almost nothing. A civilization cannot survive this mindset. Not for long. When these three forces, the death of critical thinking, the rise of short-term narcissism, and the rejection of expertise, intertwine, they do not form a sequence. They form a spiral. This is the fourth quiet truth. Civilizations collapse not in a straight line, but in a self-reinforcing loop. Psychologists call it a doom loop. One weakness feeds the next. One blind spot magnifies another. And slowly, silently, the structure unravels from within. When people lose the ability to think critically, they become vulnerable to simple answers. When simple answers dominate, long-term thinking disappears. And when long-term wisdom fades, genuine expertise becomes too slow, too complex, too uncomfortable, and thus rejected. And so the cycle repeats. Faster each time, louder but less thoughtful, more connected but less wise. Climate change is perhaps the clearest test. It demands critical thinking to understand complex systems. It demands long-term planning to sacrifice now for safety later. It demands trust in science to believe data over denial. And yet, even in the face of rising seas, burning forests, and collapsing ecosystems, the spiral tightens. A 2020 study showed that climate disasters, instead of motivating action, often reduce support for climate policy in affected areas. Why? Because fear narrows thinking. Pain demands quick fixes. In crisis, people look for villains, not solutions. This is how civilizations truly die. Not with one big event, but 1,000 quiet choices. Not with a bang, but with a series of whispers. Each one saying, not my problem, not today. Rome didn't fall in a day. It fell as citizens traded civic engagement for gladiator games. As debate turned into entertainment, as law became theater. The Maya didn't vanish overnight. They had time, they had warnings, but they kept building temples, altars, cities, even as the land cracked beneath their feet. They were brilliant, but brilliance doesn't save you when wisdom is abandoned. The same questions echo now. Are we listening? Or are we too busy scrolling, shouting, surviving the moment to notice the long decay? Because make no mistake, the foundations are shaking. And what comes next depends not on governments or institutions alone, but on the smallest, most powerful unit of a civilization, the individual. You, me. The quiet choices we make every day, the questions we dare to ask, the truths we are willing to hear, and the discomforts we are strong enough to endure. But history doesn't only tell stories of collapse, it also whispers of rebirth. This is the fifth quiet truth. Civilizations can break the cycle, but only when they choose to. The Renaissance was not inevitable. It was a response, a deliberate, painful response to centuries of stagnation. After the fall of the Roman Empire, Europe descended into ignorance, where books were burned and questioning was heresy. Knowledge became a luxury, locked behind walls of fear. And yet, it came back. Why? Because enough people refused to let darkness be the end of the story. The rediscovery of classical texts sparked a cultural reawakening. The printing press democratized knowledge. Art, science, and philosophy were no longer privileges. They became pursuits. And slowly critical thinking reemerged. Not everywhere, not all at once, but enough to change the course of human history. The key was never a single genius. It was institutions, systems that rewarded long-term thought over short-term gain. Look at Venice. For over 1,000 years, it defied the fate of so many others. Why? Because it designed its governance to resist impulse. Leaders were not chosen for charisma, but for experience. Decisions were not made in haste, but through deliberation. And their economy, built not on exploitation, but on balance between profit and preservation. Now consider South Korea. In 1960, one of the poorest nations on earth. Today, a global powerhouse in technology, education, and innovation. They didn't strike oil. They didn't wait for miracles. They made a choice to invest in thinking. Their education system doesn't just teach facts. It teaches students how to question, analyze, evaluate. They don't just memorize, they learn how to learn. It wasn't easy. It took decades. But it worked because they understood a truth many ignore. The future belongs to those who train their minds for it. In contrast, Venezuela had everything: natural resources, wealth, potential. But its leaders chose the path of comfort, corruption, and control. Institutions were hollowed out, truth was bent for power, and a nation rich in oil now suffers poverty and despair. The difference isn't luck, it's discipline. It's the willingness to value tomorrow more than today, to protect wisdom even when it isn't profitable, to trust thought even when it's slow. Renewal is possible, but it's not automatic. It demands awareness, effort, sacrifice, and most of all, the courage to build systems that outlast individual desires. Because no leader, no law, no moment of inspiration can save a society that refuses to think for itself. Rebirth begins where responsibility returns, not just to the state, but to each of us. Which brings us to the final and perhaps most personal truth. The future of a civilization does not hinge on grand revolutions. It turns on the quiet decisions made by individuals in ordinary moments. This is the sixth quiet truth. Decline is collective, but renewal is personal. You don't need a title to lead. You don't need permission to think clearly, to choose wisely, to act with integrity. History was never changed by spectators. It was changed by people who refused to stay silent, people who asked uncomfortable questions, who chose truth over popularity, discomfort over ease. Look at your habits. How often do you share information without verifying it? When was the last time you admitted you were wrong and changed your mind? These seem like small things, but they are the building blocks of culture. And culture is what either breaks or saves a society. Psychologists call it intellectual humility, the ability to say, "I don't know," and mean it. The willingness to seek opposing views. The strength to sit with complexity without rushing to judge or dismiss. We don't need to agree on everything, but we need to agree on this: reality matters, truth matters, and the capacity to think deeply is not a luxury, it is a survival skill. So what can you do? Read slowly, think deliberately, ask questions that don't have easy answers. Surround yourself with people who challenge your thinking, not just echo it. Support education that teaches how to think, not just what to think. Choose long-term wisdom over short-term gain. Even when no one is watching, you will be told it doesn't matter, that the system is too big, that your effort is too small. But that's what every crumbling civilization whispers to itself, just before it collapses. And that's also what every great renewal begins to question. Just before it begins, you are not powerless, you are not insignificant, you are one mind, and that is where all change starts. Not with blame, but with clarity. Not with fear, but with the quiet strength to do what is right even when it is hard. The question is no longer, can we save civilization? It's simpler than that. Will you try? So here we are, at the edge of the mirror, not staring at a crumbling empire or a distant civilization in ruins, but at ourselves. Because this final truth is the one we try hardest to avoid. You are part of the pattern, but you can also be the one who breaks it. Every quiet collapse in history began with people who thought their actions didn't matter. Every renewal began with someone who decided they did. This isn't a call to panic, it's a call to presence. You don't need to overhaul the world. You only need to take responsibility for your corner of it, in how you speak, in how you listen, in what you choose to ignore, and what you choose to question. Civilizations fall when people outsource their thinking, when they choose comfort over character, when they wait for someone else to do the hard work of clarity and courage. But civilizations rise, not with explosions, not with hashtags, but with quiet, consistent acts of thoughtfulness, of reflection, of depth. Start by turning inward. Ask yourself, when did I last seek out truth that made me uncomfortable? When did I last stay silent even though I knew better? What am I teaching those around me, not by words, but by example. The answers won't be easy. They're not supposed to be. Because this isn't about guilt. It's about power. The kind of power that cannot be bought, sold, or voted on. The power to choose awareness over ignorance, discipline over impulse, wisdom over noise. In the end, civilizations are not saved by governments. They're saved by people who decide that decay is not their destiny. By people who see the cracks and start patching them. One action, one thought, one habit at a time. So if you remember anything from this story, let it be this. The pattern is real, but it is not fate. Collapse is not inevitable. Stupidity is not destiny. And history, the kind worth making, always begins with someone who refused to look away. Be that someone. Think with clarity. Live with courage. And become the quiet reason why the story turns, not toward darkness, but toward light.